Have you ever thought, why don't they teach that in school? As a teacher of 23 years myself, I noticed that students had less and less of some of the basic skills they needed for everyday life. You know, things like how to write a thank you note, how to make a phone call, how to apologize, how to write a check and balance your account, how to sew on a button, how to clean the bathroom and vacuum and do laundry, how to operate a fire extinguisher, how to turn off the water to the house. And thus, Adulting 101 was born. You can go to jamesdevine.net, click on the Adulting 101 course link, and take a view of a few free lessons. And if you like what you see, sign up for the full course, and you can get 30% off as a Cool Grandpa listener. Just enter the code COOLGRANDPA at checkout.
Hi, I am proud to have partnered with Redio. As you guys may have heard from past episodes, Redio is a great application that enables grandparents and parents to maintain and grow relationships through virtual reading of books with their grandchildren. Now, Redio does not take the place of any kind of in-person interaction or in-person reading to your grandchildren. But what it does allow for is for those remote connections when you can't be there with your grandchild every evening. Redio has well over 4,000 children's titles, and there's bound to be titles in here that you and your grandchild are going to enjoy together. There's a great way that you can build a library with your grandchild, and there's fun interactive tools within Redio that allows grandchildren to point to objects that are interesting to them, as well as you using the pointer to show objects that are interesting to you and that you're trying to express to the grandchild. So what I want you guys to do is go to thecoolgrandpa.us, look for the affiliate links on the top of the website, click on that, and then go down to the Redio links. Once you click on that, then you'll be taken to Redio where you can learn more about the application, and then you can also sign up for your free 14-day trial period. I know you're going to enjoy this application to maintain and grow those relationships when you just can't be there in person. So do yourself a favor, go to thecool-grandpa.us, look for the affiliate link, and then scroll down to Redio. I'm sure you're going to enjoy it, and I'm looking forward to hearing stories about how you've used Redio to build those connections. Hello, and welcome to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. This is your host, Greg Payne, coming at you from Studio 12. This podcast is about being the best possible grandpa you can be, focusing on what it is to be a grandpa and how we can all share that experience together for our grandchildren. Welcome, and I hope you're having a great day wherever you are. I want to introduce today's guest, Kerry Byrne. Now, Kerry has a Ph.D. and has been studying aging and care for well over 25 years. She's the founder of the Long Distance Grandparent and is on a mission to help build strong bridges and bonds between grandparents and their grandchildren who are at a distance. Now, as a mom of two, Kerry has a unique perspective of being right in that middle of the grandchildren and the grandparents. And it's been fantastic having her live away from her parents and her in-laws. And she spent time in Dubai as well as in Houston, Texas before moving back to the Toronto area. So Kerry's not only applying things that she's learned in academia, but she's also applying real life experience as that mother who wants that bond between the grandchildren and the grandparents, right? So we're going to get into this, and at the end of this, we're going to talk about the long-distance grandparent, and we're going to have lots of links on the website as well as Kerry's email address. So be sure to go check out the show notes, look for the links for the long-distance grandparent, as well as Kerry's email, so you can send her any other questions that may have popped up in your mind. Without further ado, let's dive into the conversation. Kerry, thank you so much for being on the Cool Grandpa Podcast. This is going to be really a unique perspective that you bring from both a mom side of it, watching the relationship between your children and your parents and your in-laws, as well as your background in studying aging and care and everything that goes into that, from mental well-being and connections. So this is a treat for us.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here, and I'm especially excited to be talking about grandpas. So grandpas have a special place in my heart for a number of reasons, but I'm just delighted to be here, Greg. Thanks for having me.
As I talked about a little bit before, some of what you have going on and where you've created the long distance grandparent has come out of your passion for making sure that your children stay connected with their grandparents.
Yes, I always knew that the relationship between grandparents and grandchildren was an important one. And based on my work in aging, care, and connection in the research world, and intergenerational connection in general being really important. But when I had my first son and just saw the impact of, I felt like I kind of held him up and said, like, I have produced this child for you. And everybody was just so excited about it and so happy about it. And so I think until you kind of see that relationship firsthand, that it just kind of became more apparent, the importance of it. And then, of course, we've always been at a distance from my children's grandparents. And so I am a Canadian, my husband's British. And so we have grandparents in England, and even in Canada is a rather large place. And so from the time that my first son was born, we were, the closest grandparent was a 5-hour drive. And so we've been at a distance always. And then we were unexpectedly transferred to Dubai when my son was about 2.5. And I, in particular, remember being at the airport with my dad saying goodbye, because I was in my 30s by then and almost 40. I'm an older mom. And I'd left him before. I married a British guy. I'd lived in England, but I'd never left him with, his grandchild in my arms. And, his face crumpled, my face crumpled. And I do remember having this thought that I am not going to let this relationship suffer because of the distance, because he'd put so much effort in to building this relationship with this tiny human that he loved so much. And so that kind of started my thinking about, kind of ultra long distance grandparenting, because we were in different time zone, a lot of challenges associated with that for grandparents.
Oh, sure. And it's interesting too, because one of the big things that hits us when we're new grandfathers, especially, is we don't necessarily know how that whole relationship's going to develop. And we want a relationship, but there's no instruction manual on, okay, if you live next door to your grandchild, these are all the things that you can do. And if you're going to be remote, here's all the things you can do. And it's tough because I think we also project what that relationship is going to be. Certainly as a grandfather, I'm thinking in terms of with a 3-year-old grandson. I can't wait to throw a baseball or play soccer or wrestle around with him or something along those lines. And when you have years in between visits, that can be tough. I mean, even if you see each other once a year, those kids grow so much within that year span that I think grandparents can miss out on a lot.
They do. And you've hit on something really important, which is that for a long distance grandparent, sometimes the first step is reconciling how they thought grandparenting would be and what it would look like. And then, what it is like now. And so there's actually quite a lot of grief that can come into play when you're a long distance grandparent, because you did not anticipate that it would be like this, perhaps. And you did not anticipate that the grief and loss of time and connection that you felt would be so strong. And I've definitely, certainly over the course of the last, year and a half, heard from, hundreds of grandparents who are in that particular situation. And so, yeah, it's a huge point. If there's a major emotional complexity to grandparenting from a distance that I don't think that people realize until they're in that spot, right? That being a long distance grandparent is actually quite different than kind of having your grandchild's, down the street. Sure, there's overlap and there are some shared joys and challenges of being a grandparent, no matter where your grandchild lives. But for long distance grandparents in particular, there are some kind of key challenges that they're facing. And that's
Sure.
certainly one of them.
And especially if, as an adult, you remember back as a youth, if your grandparents lived in the same town and you were accustomed to having meals together, or you're accustomed to having grandparents showing up to your school events or sporting events. And then for so many of us now, that where we've moved away from home, and for grandparents, especially now, we don't know how that remote grandparenting really works. And so there's a lot of us baby boomers and Gen Xers, I'm more in the Gen Xer category, by the way, that are trying to figure out, like, okay, how do we do this grandparenting thing when we don't see the grandkids so much anymore?
That's a big question. It's a big question. And I'm going to have a lot of answers. I think that, one of the things that you mentioned is that we often, yes, we remember from our own childhood having, and I'm 45, so I'm actually closer in age to a first-time grandparent than I am to having, my youngest son is 3. And we remember kind of like Saturday morning with the grandparents, or like Sunday evening roast with our grandparents. And I still encourage grandparents to have this connection habit, right? So take some time to work on the relationship when you can't be in the relationship. And so you may not be able to see them every Saturday morning for blueberry pancakes, but you can certainly sit down and do a little bit of preparation for the relationship, right? Get some snail mail together, think about what you might chat about on a video call as an example. And so there's a real kind of planning component to being a long distance grandparent. And I think grandparents who live locally do this too. If your grandchild's coming over, for some reason, they're popping by, you often have the kind of toy box for the grandchild. And so when you're at a distance, I still think you should have a toy box that you can bring out to a Skype call and, use those toys and play together on a video chat.
Also, it's important to have those, so when you do have the grandchild come over, even if you're at a distance, that you're still ready. You're not running out to Walmart or wherever you can find toys quickly. And also, I think kids now, it's not so much the toddlers, but the ones where they start to get around 8, 9, 10 years old, and they can understand that these may have been mom's toys or dad's toys that the parents have just kind of kept and put in that, let's say, grandparent toy box.
I think there's a gift that grandparents have, is a secret knowledge about the parents. And so being able to bring those stories in about the parents to, you're the only one that knows them and the only one that will be able to share that with your grandchildren. And they always love hearing a story about, yes, like what was their parents' favorite toy, and having that there, I think is quite special.
Absolutely. I know when I used to go to my grandfather's farm in Eastern Oregon, he had the old Lone Ranger set with the old horse. It had Silver and the Lone Ranger and Tonto. And most of it was pretty beat up because of my uncles, I think. But then also it was the grandkids pulling into it. And we were looking at these toys that were popular back in the 60s that our aunts and uncles were playing with. And it seemed kind of at least a little bit of a special connection that we were still getting enjoyment out of these things many years down the road.
Yeah. And I think it's that, it becomes about the time you spend together playing, no matter what you're actually playing with, that you have that opportunity to play together.
Now, when you guys were in Dubai and even down in Houston, what were some of the ways that you were keeping your children and their grandparents connected?
Well, so my son was about 2.5 when we got there. And so we did a lot of video chatting. And so from the parents' perspective, and I mean, it definitely takes both the parents and the grandparents to keep this relationship going. We were able to, I would just kind of take the grandparents to mealtime, right? I always say, especially for younger, so the age of your grandson, Greg, meal times or snack times are great because they're kind of expected to be sat there, and even younger, they're strapped in to a high chair.
Sure.
And so these are great times for a video chat. I mean, send a snack and like a parent approved snack to your grandchild, and then have the same snack ready for you, right? Or like plan to eat the same thing together so that you can show them that you're doing the same thing on a video chat. We did a lot of bath times together because, again, that's a time when they're sat. But I was able to just pull out my phone and kind of bring the grandparents into our life. I think that, as he got a little bit older, we had to get a little more creative, because I know that a lot of grandparents talk about having a challenging time engaging children who are, 2, 3, for example. And the challenges remain as they get older. You have to kind of stay on top of what they're interested in. And when I was in Dubai, I started what I called the Grandparent Interview Project. And I reached out to a lot of expat moms, because I started to notice on the beach in Dubai in about November, I was calling it grandparent season, because all the grandparents come over because it's not chokingly hot in November in Dubai. And they were coming to visit. And so I asked if I could interview the grandparents. And so I sat down and spoke with a number of grandparents and just interviewed them about their experience of being a long distance grandparent. And one of the themes that came out was that they were worried that their grandchild would not know them and that they wouldn't know their grandchild. And then when you look at the research about long distance grandparenting, and there is not a ton of research about it, but the biggest barrier and challenge is that the grandparent doesn't know what the child is interested in, right? They're not sure what they're into or what they care about. And so there are tons of games you can play that are really easy to find out, right? And you play a game of favorites and make it timed. And it's like, what's your favorite fruit? What's your favorite vegetable? What's your favorite toy? What's your favorite book? You can send them around the house to look for those things. And I'm a big fan of taking notes and just jot things down, right? Because if they've told you that, their favorite color is blue, then the next piece of snail mail that you want to send is going to be in a blue envelope, right? And like highlighting that you remembered that you remembered their favorites. And so, grandchildren, when they get older, will remember that grandparents remembered these small details of their life. But these are the small details, and those small moments are what make up your relationship, whether you're at a distance or around the corner.
Well, and that's a great point, because I think whether, like you said, whether you're around the corner or across the globe, one of the keys for building those relationships is having an interest in whatever the grandkids are into. And we know that can shift quickly at times.
Daily sometimes.
It does. I thought the last time I saw my grandson, his character Blimpy was his favorite. He was watching hours and hours of Blimpy.
Yes.
And then I discovered that, okay, well, that's old news now. He's now on to something else. And so all those expectations of getting the Blimpy dolls and all the merchandise that this guy's now putting out there, suddenly it's gone. But showing that interest builds that connection with him, both remotely and in person. And then I think that just grows and develops as they get older, because now the kids know that their grandparents are interested in what they have going on in their world. It's not just a one-way street as far as this is what the grandparents are interested in. It's okay, who else is interested in your world besides your mom and dad?
Yes. And I think one of the best things that you can do is interview your grandchild on a regular basis. And so we see in a lot of the intergenerational connection work, people are encouraged to interview their grandparents. And we'll see it coming up in September for Grandparents' Day, right? Like interview your grandparent for Grandparents' Day. And I think it's wonderful. I also think that grandparents can interview their grandchildren, and that we underestimate, and I've seen just huge success from the grandparents I've been working with when they make it kind of formalized, right? So like you can get a little microphone and say that you want to interview them, and it does not matter. They can, as long as they can talk, they can be interviewed, right? Because if they're younger, sure, you can ask them if they like this or that and go through a series of things, right? Do you like puppies or do you like cats? And if you have visual aids, that always helps in a Skype chat. But I think that as they get older, especially grandchildren who are like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, not a lot of people really, but beyond their parents, ask them about themselves. And I mean, as adults, we know this. Like, how many times have you gone to a party and thought, wow, no one even asked me one question about me, right? Like you might be in a circle of people where other people are asking or kind of sharing about themselves, but not asking about you. And so I think that translates into most relationships, and you will find out such interesting things about your grandchildren when you just ask them questions. And so I often on my blog share different types of questions. And I think I also share this idea of kind of gamifying questions. And so not just, especially you have to switch it up, but I talk about using multiple choice questions with your grandchildren, right? So, and I'm really lucky. I have, a 6-year-old who gives me ideas all the time because of the way that he asks me questions. And the way that he talks to his grandpa and asks him questions. And so, you can turn a would you rather question to something really personal as well, right? Like, next time I see you, would you rather that we, go to the movies or go to a museum? And you can throw some silly ones in there, but I think there's a real opportunity to kind of gamify your conversation and get their attention and let them know, like, I have 5 questions I just want to ask you, and kind of come out with it, because I think that sometimes children think their grandparents are going to keep them on the phone or the video for a very long period of time. And so if you kind of set that, I've only got 2 minutes and I want to ask you these 5 questions, introducing a temporal component to the conversation is another technique that you can use.
Well, and I like the idea of keeping it a little bit short and sweet with the attention spans that the grandkids have. I know with the 3-year-old, if we're just doing a video chat, if I can get a couple of minutes, that's great. If I'm reading a book to him remotely, I can get 20, 30 minutes because we can go through a couple of books, but they're being stimulated by the different changes of the pictures. But each time we flip a page, I can ask questions as far as, do you see the ladybug in the corner of the page? Or do you see these different types of things where it's getting that response back from them, but it's also cluing me in on what they're interested in and what really jumps out at them on the books.
Yes. And I use something with grandparents called the connection loop. And so, you have kind of 3 main modes of communication and contact with your grandchildren. And so you have these in-person visits. Predominantly, you're going to be having these video chats probably, and depending on the distance. And then you have snail mail. And so the loop is really, how can you make the mail that you send relevant to a video chat, right? So much like you've said, so some of these video book apps that kind of give you something to talk about or chat about, well, what can you send in the mail that then encourages them to come to the video chat? And so this might be, sending a few jokes without the answers, right? Call me for the answers. And I call that the call to connection, right? Make sure that you are making sure that you're asking for the connection, because snail mail can be used in a really powerful way. If you're going to visit them, create some use video, use mail to create some anticipation for that visit, right? Take a picture of the small gift that you have for them, so that they know that they have to look for the purple box when you get there, right? So that you're holding the purple box, and it kind of helps transition into that visit. But it's a way to use those 3 modes of communication together that I think can really strengthen the moments that you share together, and kind of puts you in front of them. Like the mailbox is your absolute, secret weapon as a grandparent. Children we all love to receive mail. My grandfather used to call it real mail. Is there any real mail out there for me, Kerry? And it was, it was always bills. And sometimes it was a postcard from me, and he used to always send me postcards. And his was the only real mail that I got. And so I think that we underestimate how exciting it is for a child to get mail, and how many different ways you can use it and creatively to connect with your grandchild.
And I like the idea of the postcards, because just by the size of the object, you're limited to just a couple of sentences. So for younger grandkids, as they start to be able to do the letters and words and things, you can write just really short messages on there. And I think it empowers them a little bit. If they're able to take that card and read it a little bit themselves, then it becomes even a little bit more, I think, of a this is a grandparent and me conversation, not a three-way where I need a parent to tell me what grandpa or grandma wrote to me.
Yes. And I mean, from a parent's perspective, you're giving the child practice reading as well. So, if you're going to write a postcard to them, I think that's great. Look up sight words if they're 5, like that's what they're kind of learning, right? 5, 6, and make sure that you include a lot of sight words in your postcards to them, because it'll be more likely that they can read them. This is what they're teaching them in school now, these high frequency words. And it is exciting for my son when he can actually read the mail and that comes in. And you're right, because it's for him and he doesn't really have to, doesn't need me to necessarily participate in it.
Yeah, no, that's great. How have you been noticing with the long distance grandparents, the adaptation of technology? Do you think grandparents are jumping on board and staying up with it? Or do you think most of us need a little bit of coaching on how to make it work?
I think that grandparents are jumping on board. I mean, that's a huge motivation for grandparents to use technology as their grandchildren. And I think that, again, we underestimate how, well, the kind of age at which someone becomes a grandparent, early 50s. And I think B, that increasingly we're in a technological world. And so I try and use, in working with grandparents, I just use simple, I kind of say I'm tech agnostic, like whatever video chat app you use with your grandchild, the ideas that I share work for that, right? Like any of the materials or ideas that I share, does not matter if you are on Zoom or FaceTime or WhatsApp. I mean, there are just so many ways that you can connect now. I think that it is important, if you can, to try and meet the family where they're at. So if they're always using WhatsApp and that's something that you can figure out, then use WhatsApp if you can. And, I'm on a multitude of different technologies because my father was an absolute pioneer when it came to Skype, because he has family in Ireland, and he and his friend figured out, when no one knew what Skype was, that you could call overseas for free. And so gone were the days of having to speak really quickly before the minutes were up and saying like, hello, Auntie, talking so fast.
Right.
Right. Because, and I remember when he first told me about Skype, I said, yeah, right, Dad, like a free way to talk overseas. So he uses Skype, and I appreciate that he's been using it for a long time. And so we use that as well. But we have family in Europe who are more likely to use WhatsApp as an example. So I just think from a technology perspective, it's important to try and meet each other where you're at. Like you're in a collaboration and partnership when you're trying to keep people connected from a distance and when you're at a distance.
I think too, like you said, that motivation of here's a grandchild, whenever the grandchildren start to show up, is, and you're not down the street, being able to connect with them. Whether, of course, the phone has been around for over 100 years now, but the video chatting and some of the other technologies that are out there really start to motivate us to learn to keep up. I mean, I still remember when MySpace was the social app of choice amongst everybody, and that's gone away. And then you have all of these, and wherever the family's at, I like that. And the grandchildren is where the grandparents need to migrate over to, or should, maybe, just to make it easier to maintain those connections.
And I think vice versa. So I think that if, as a parent, if you are able to kind of use the technologies that are easier for the grandparents, then that's fine. Sometimes it's not even about them being easier. It's just familiarity and what we're used to and what we have. And so, listen, I can still remember sending my first email. And so I'm of that generation. I remember it popping up on the screen and thinking, what? This person is sending me a message from where?
Right. No, I absolutely remember that when I was at university, and we all had our .edu emails, and it's like, why do I even need this? I went through high school and a couple of years afterwards not needing this at all. Why do I need this? And it was like, oh, now the teachers are communicating with you, and here's your syllabus, and here's your assignments, and here's, so definitely started in the 90s with the email and everything else becoming more prevalent.
we're all always adapting. So it does not matter what age you are right now, you are out of touch with something that is going on with somebody who's 10 years younger than you from a technology perspective or social media perspective. And so I think that sometimes this gets put onto, older adults not being familiar with things, or, I mean, this is like, I don't know anything about TikTok, and my 11-year-old niece was here and she does, and my 17-year-old cousin. And, in order to connect with them, I feel like maybe I need to learn about TikTok. So I think we're always being asked to learn. And especially when you're at a distance from people, you're being asked to kind of learn new things.
Now, one of the questions I've got for you is, with your study of aging and connections, how important is it for folks like me that are getting older to have those connections with grandchildren and with the families, as we all move away from each other? But how is that on, I don't know, our mental health and well-being of aging populations to have connections?
I mean, it's hard to kind of place enough emphasis on the importance of it from research that's come out, around even loneliness, social isolation. But putting all of that aside, because I'm not saying that, grandparents are feeling lonely or socially isolated. I think that it is just, relationships matter. They matter for your health, right? They matter for your social health, and they matter for your physical health. And I actually would flip it, if you'd let me, and
okay,
say that I believe that grandchildren need their grandparents now more than ever. I think that we've just been talking about technology, social media, where children are looking for this sense of belonging on these different apps. And when you look at the research, it's like years later, their sense of belonging comes from their family and their grandparents. It's where their identity is created. And so I think that grandparents have a huge role to play in this, and that we need you now more than ever to step up and be there for our kids, and to help, shape them and teach them where they came from and teach them what what our family is all about, and keeping them close to you in that way, I think, is really, really important.
I agree, because I've thought about that a little bit too, in terms of, with all the technology and everybody getting plugged in so much earlier, that it's possible for these young kids to be going to school but living on the devices, and their relationships are all digital. They're not interpersonal. And then, we see some of these things with cyberbullying and some of these other things that go on in the social media world. It's hard to understand that face-to-face and that family unit can really be what differentiates child going off into really a depression spiral or an anger spiral, because of somebody who's thousands of miles away, that they've never met in person, that they've never had lunch with, has said something mean to them. And when they don't have those connections from grandparents and family, I think that can really help them feel super isolated as well.
Yeah. And you can expect to have a long relationship with your grandchild. When you're becoming, a grandparent in your early 50s, right, you can expect a really long relationship and a lot of influence on your grandchild and with your grandchild. And so I do believe, though, that it requires, especially from a distance, because that's what we're talking about today, a level of intentionality, so that you need to go the extra mile, both, figuratively and literally. But that is what it comes down to, is that moving towards, I guess, more consistent, intentional, deliberate connection with your grandchild when they're at a distance, to make sure that you are an influence and that they know that you're there for them.
One of the things I want to ask you about is, how did you start to develop the long distance grandparenting network and the project that you're doing?
Well, it started with the interviews back in Dubai, and where these words just kept ringing in my mind about, I'm worried they're not going to know me. I'm worried I won't know them. And then when I started looking on grandparenting forums, I saw the same thing, right? I'm really worried I'm not going to bond with my grandchild. My grandchild just moved away. They're not going to know me. And I was thinking, I know that it's so possible, right? I know that you can know them and you can have a beautiful, meaningful relationship. And so that was really, I started the long distance grandparent testing out that premise that if I shared ideas that were creative, based in evidence, and really looking at like the science of connection, child development, intergenerational connection. So I'm not just saying like send your child a coloring page, right? Or your grandchild a coloring page in the mail. I'm embedding connection into that in different ways. And so it started off with that and had such a great response that last year I launched the Long Distance Grandparent Society. And so that is an online monthly membership for grandparents. And I had planned to launch it before the pandemic, but I felt kind of buoyed and urged to do it because I'd heard from so many grandparents who were having a tough time, and started this beautiful group of grandparents, bringing them together. And what I started with was actually, I call it a digital subscription box. And so each month I would email out this pack of activities. So they get, virtual grand dates, they get snail mail to send. And again, all based in the science of connection and intergenerational connection. And then the grandparents said to me, we would actually, we'd like to meet up together. And I had a welcome party the first time, and it was so beautiful. I mean, there were laughter and there were tears. And so that's now part of the membership. And so every single month we get together and meet, and we discuss wins. We discuss, people kind of inspire each other. We discuss some of the challenges and how to move forward. And we now do it twice a month because it's been so popular. And I bring in guest experts to come and talk to us about issues that are relevant to grandparents. And it has helped me. I knew as a parent that I was never meant to parent alone. But what I have learned from grandparents in particular over the last year is that we also were not meant to grandparent alone. It's a huge transition, and it's a big role and a lot of responsibility to being a grandparent. And so I think that the community aspect of this membership has been pretty fantastic. Just kind of celebrating together when something goes really well.
It's one of the things where I think as grandparents, sometimes we can feel isolated, especially as a grandfather, that this has never been talked about at school or really anywhere about, hey, welcome new grandfathers. Here's 5 things to think about. I mean, every relationship, every family dynamic is completely different. But at the same time, you get from a grandfather's perspective, you get the news that you're going to become a grandfather, and you're starting to think about, well, did I have a relationship with my grandfathers? If so, what do I want to take forward from that relationship? If I didn't, how do I do this? And who do I model after? And then there's not a lot of, hey, here's tips and tricks and things that work that you might want to try, and, take what works and forget the rest. So this is a great opportunity to allow people to come together and, like you said, share wins, get ideas as far as, hey, this is how my grandson's responding. I tried these 3 things. He wasn't really that into it, but I tried this one. All of a sudden now we've got this great connection going. And I think grandparents need that information and that feedback.
Yeah. And again, I'll just kind of use the analogy of parenting again. We sit around and talk, and, everyone who's a grandparent's been a parent. And so, the sitting around in that kind of bonding and connection that you had with other parents because you were going through this. And this is the same for grandparents and for long distance grandparents, that we are all going through this together. And there are components of this period of life in this relationship that can only be understood by other grandparents, right? Or people that really understand the necessity of this relationship or how important this relationship is. And we have the loveliest grandpas in our community, and they are very active in the community. And so, when I first started the long distance grandparent, someone said, why don't you focus on the grandmas, right? Like the long distance grandmas. And I really resisted that because after spending that year of connecting with grandparents, I hear from a lot of grandpas who are looking for ways to connect with their grandchildren from a distance. And so, yeah, I'm happy to say that we've just got a really a lovely community that includes grandparents and grandchildren, sorry, grandmas and grandpas.
I've interviewed a few different people now where they're modeling from their grandfathers were almost this, let's say, the Victorian kind of model where grandfathers showed up for dinners, they had dinners, they may have asked the grandkids about school and grades, and then that was it. There was no getting down on the floor. There was no, any of that. So these guys have intentionally tried to figure out, how do I build that connection so that when my grandsons and granddaughters are asked about me when they're in their 50s, they're going, oh, my grandfather was the best. He was down on the ground. He was playing with us. He took us water skiing. He did all these different things. But there's some intentionality and there's some knowledge that grandfathers especially have to have with that relationship and building that.
I developed something called Your Grand Path to Connection. And it's 5 different elements: plan, partner, prepare, play, and preserve. And so the first one being plan is really what you've talked about in play, of course, but planning for and thinking about what kind of grandparent do you want to be. And when grandparents first join the Long Distance Grandparent Society, I always say, okay, this might sound a little woo-woo, but we're going to talk about what is your grandparent vision statement. What do you want to achieve in this relationship, and what are the values that you want to share with them? And I've also come to understand that this is, and from other members describing it back to me this way, is that they've been able to figure out what is their brand of grandparenting, right? What's their brand of grandparenting? And so for some, they're not going to be kind of silly on a video chat. It's just not their thing, or they're not into the humor. Others are, right? Others have built entire relationships in the last year over just different ways of sharing jokes. But for some, it's been photos, and that they're going to be the photo grandparent and make sure that photos are captured. And so that planning component is really important. And I when we started this conversation, I talked about connection habits, and I'm not trying to make it complicated, but I am trying to encourage us to think about what are some of the ways that we can be more deliberate in this relationship. Because when things get tough, and they will, sometimes as they get older, when they kind of naturally, as they're supposed to, turn to their friends when they're teenagers, you want to be able to have something that you can look back to say that this was your vision and this is your intention. And so you might have to change your techniques, but it's really, I think, a valuable thing to be reminded of what you felt when they were 2 years old and what kind of relationship you wanted to have at that point.
Now, what was the other, I had plan and partner, and you were talking, I'm trying to take notes here, and we'll get all this stuff up on the show notes, I promise. But I want to go through the other 4 elements and talk about those. I think partner was the next one, right?
Yeah. So shall I say the 5 again? So it's plan, yes, partner, prepare, play, and preserve. You can tell that I'm used to saying these 5 different P's. The partner piece of it is looking at, who are your partners in this relationship? And of course, the parents are your main partners. And so they often get called the gatekeepers to the relationship. I mean, they need to put, especially a young child, they need to get them in front of the camera to have a conversation with you. I also would encourage grandparents to look at who are the other potential partners that you have in the relationship. So maybe you have a fun uncle that you could bring on to a Zoom chat that would then, get the 8-year-old a little more excited to be on the Zoom call, or cousins, right? Like we spent the last year, every single weekend, having a Zoom chat with the cousins and the grandparents. And my son showed up not always because of his grandparents, but because he wanted to see his cousins and hear about their BMX adventures. And so there are other partners available to you that if you kind of look at it, or if there's a nanny who's taking care of a child, right? Or someone else, even the local grandparents sometimes can be, they're the ones that would understand the most how heartbreaking it is to be at a distance. And so sometimes they can be a good partner. Prepare is pretty much what it sounds like, but it's mainly make sure that if you're going to have this video chat with them, to just have something prepared. You can just Google, like if your grandson is into cars, dinosaurs, whatever it is, right? Like conversation starters for 5-year-olds about dinosaurs, and print them off and have them available, right? Dinosaur jokes for 5-year-olds. So it can really just be, I don't expect anyone to be a 3-ring circus. It probably helps if you're willing to kind of, have the silly glasses on or have a funny hat or just look different on video, because you need to be able to get their attention. But just preparing something for that interaction, much like you would if they were coming to visit you. I think it's the same. We have a grandpa who plays Barbies with his granddaughter. And this is something that he's learned through the membership, right? That it's very possible to play together from a distance on video. And then I've got play. Oh, I just talked about play. I mean, they really, these overlap. But it's not always about playing, but it's about the willingness to be playful and to be a little bit silly and not take yourself too seriously. I think that it's been a while for most grandparents since they've hung out with a 2-year-old or a 6-year-old or a 10-year-old. And so just to be mindful of, what that age is like. And if you can't remember what that age is like, then again, jump on Google and read about 6-year-olds or read about 10-year-olds and what they're facing. Maybe it's someone who's 15, read about, if your grandchildren are a bit older, go read about Generation Z and, see what they're saying about them. So just being kind of a bit knowledgeable and able to kind of play with them in that way. And then preserve is the one that is my favorite part of this, because what I say over and over again is that if we're going to work this hard to have this relationship, then let's preserve it. And so these children have a lot of pictures and will have a lot of pictures of themselves on their own, sitting there looking very cute when they're 3 and 5 and 10. But what do they want to see in 20 years from now? They want to see you sitting with them, right? So, I mean, get in, if you get into anything else, get into selfies, grand selfies, and take them with your grandchildren and take videos. They'll want to hear your voice one day. They're going to want to hear, what you sounded like when you sang to them, and, read a book to them, or whatever that might be. So that would be my last, is just make sure that you kind of get into the pictures, get into the videos. I know it's the tendency is to just, my mother-in-law does this, right? She pulls out her iPad and then takes cute pictures of the kids. I'm like, they're going to want to see you in those pictures one day, Oma.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, and I like the preserve part as well, because with the technology that we've got around us, it should be a no-brainer for us to be in front of a camera, recording our voices. I mean, when we were kids, it was Super 8 video that may or may not have had any sound, and then it was the VCRs or VHS recorders. And those big things where you did have a little bit more sound, but it was still difficult to have. Or we had cassette recorders. And I've got interviews, I think, with my grandparents that were on cassette recorders. I have no idea where those cassettes are. And if I find them, they're probably deteriorated quite a bit. And now we have these digital formats that we definitely should be taking advantage of, recording some of those Skype conversations and just leaving a file off on the computer so the grandkids can find it, later, or we can share it with them.
I agree. I mean, if you use Zoom, you can record any Zoom call with a free account. And so you're able to then kind of save it. But I also think there's something about writing letters. And so I've just talked about this recently with my email list, and the importance of writing letters to your grandchildren and using kind of the language that you would normally use in the letters. And this is because I just received some letters from an old family friend that my grandmother had written to her. And she was talking about, my grandmother was talking about my grandpa and my grandma. And she passed away when I was 13. I could hear her voice reading these because they were so conversational in tone. So I think, yes, we have a lot of definitely digital ways to, kind of keep and store the relationship. But that never underestimate the power of a good old fashioned letter that you keep for your grandchild and share with them.
Now, with the letters, do you suggest handwritten or typed out? Because I know handwriting and cursive seems to be going away. But what are your thoughts on either one of those?
Well, my thought is whatever you're going to do. So if you can type and that's the way that what's more likely to happen, I try to keep things not complicated. I think it's beautiful to see someone's handwriting and to be able to, I mean, I don't know, there's just something about seeing somebody's handwriting that I personally love right now. Yes, I have no idea how kids 30 years from now, if they're going to be able to read it or not, but I think there'll be someone around who can kind of decode, like, what is this, this coded cursive writing going on?
Right.
Maybe just print it to make it a little easier for them. But yeah, I say just do it in whatever way means that you're going to do it.
That's good advice too, because even through a typed or digital letter, whatever it is, the voice and the personality is still going to come through, especially if we don't over edit, type these things out. And I love reading some of my old grandfather's letters to me. I find those, I've got a special place where I put them, and every so often when I come across that, I'll read a few of those. And you're right. You can, if you're fortunate enough to have heard their voice, that voice comes back to you when you're reading that material.
Yeah. And I don't think that grandchildren are ever too young to start doing that. I mean, you can start writing to your grandson now, reflections on what it's been like to become a grandpa. And I mean, he'll have a lot because you have an entire podcast based around it. So he'll get to hear your voice and talking about him. But I do think that you can start writing letters to children at any age, and that it becomes, again, a habit for you. And it's a connection habit that you are more likely to stay with over the years.
One of the things I do want to talk about and make sure that it's easy for people to get involved with the long distance grandparent is I'm going to be putting the link up to the site in the show notes. But then how else, what are some of the other things that you have going on around that? Because I think there's a Facebook group that you can, as part of the membership, that you get access to. What are some of the other things that people will get as they join up?
So the long distance grandparent website has kind of just my blog on it. And you can also sign up for the wait list for the Long Distance Grandparent Society, because it's not open all the time right now. I am a slow and steady kind of developer. And so I've closed it for the last few months. We have just made an international move in our family, but you can find a place to sign up for the wait list because I will be opening it soon. So if you are interested in hearing more about the Long Distance Grandparent Society, and this is the online monthly membership program that I run with and for grandparents, then you can find that at thelongdistancegrandparent.com. I also, as part of the membership, there's a Facebook group. And I would say, the real value is in the Zoom calls, the connection packs that you receive every month, and guest experts coming in to just help you think about grandparenting in a different way to keep you inspired. And so that's kind of the main way. I mean, I have a Facebook page that you can come on over and like and follow. And so you'll see what's going on. I'll probably be doing a webinar for grandparents in the next couple of months. But if you're on my email list, then you'll be the first to know about all of these things. And also I send you, this is free. Every week I just send out an idea or inspiration to grandparents just to help you think about some new ideas for staying connected. And I've got a couple of free downloads on my website as well about how to make video chats more interesting and how to bond with your grandchildren. And you can email me anytime if you need help, if you're facing a certain challenge, just send me an email, because it's just little me at the other end of the email box for now.
Oh, you don't have a big empire going yet?
Coming.
Yeah.
It's coming. I'm excited. Listen, Greg, I'm excited about it. I am, my faith in humanity is restored every day through my inbox and the messages that I receive from grandparents who care so much about this relationship. And I think that, one of the kind of larger kind of missions for me and for my business is to make sure that I'm able to elevate the voice of grandparents. And I know I'm not a grandparent yet, but I think because I'm in the middle, that middle generation, I can see how important it is. And, I provide a very different perspective because I'm not the grandparent, right? I am the parent. I am the mom, the busy mom that you're trying to get to, video chat with the grandchild. So I'm excited about the possibilities, but I'm also just really happy to be bringing this community of grandparents together and for the opportunity to be here chatting with you today.
It's been so rewarding every time I do these interviews, whether I'm talking with grandfathers about what they're doing and how their relationships are, or with grandchildren about how their grandfathers affected them. It really lights me up inside. And I'm glad that I'm finding more people that are also kind of waving this flag saying, hey, grandparents are more important than just, slipping $5 in a birthday card. That relationship is meaningful and it's impactful when we're intentional about building that relationship and maintaining that relationship with the grandkids.
Yeah. And I'll say it again. I think that grandchildren need their grandparents. I think that it's like having, having someone else in your family network to love you in that way. I will often share something with my children's grandparents because I think no one else will care this much that they just said this funny thing, right? Or that their tooth fell out. Like there really is no one else in the world who will care that much about it as their grandparents, right? Who will laugh with me, who will share in that moment with me, and who will tell their friends the funny thing that my son has said. And so, yeah, I'm noticing it too, though, Greg. I'm noticing a rise in grandparents who are saying, actually, this relationship is really important, and the grandparents in general are really important to the development of our children and to society at large, frankly. Anything else that you'd like to talk about that maybe I haven't brought up or we haven't touched on? I think we've covered it all. The grandparents in my membership laugh because I always say that I have an idea a minute, and I do. I really do. And I have seen it. And so with my son, who is 6, and his grandfather, they had not seen each other in almost 2 years because of the pandemic. And we've nurtured this interest that they both share. My father played soccer for Ireland, and my son is crazy about soccer. And, so they spent the time, my dad's 80, they spent the time at the cottage playing soccer. And when we dropped my dad off, I wasn't actually there. My husband dropped him off, and my son burst into tears. And, as much as I was sad that I hadn't prepared him more for that moment, just to see the emotion and the sadness in leaving his grandpa, like they have a true bond in a relationship. And so I guess what I want to leave everybody with is that, it is really possible. It's possible. And I know that sometimes it feels like it isn't from a distance, but it can be. And the long distance grandparent is there to help grandparents in any way that they need. I can tell you, whenever I went out to Oregon and saw my grandfather, and for a few weeks at a time on his farm, and I had to go, it was tough. It was, this city boy wanted to be on the farm a little bit more with his grandfather. So I can appreciate that relationship. And there is just something, isn't there? There's just something that just makes it special when you know that they're kind of like your mommy's daddy or whatever it is. Like we're connected. And so it's just, it's beautiful. Yeah. And folks, again, that's the long distance grandparent. Please go there, check it out. I'm going to be putting links to Kerry's email, the website. So you have all those resources on the show notes that you can go to and check those out as well. But Kerry, thank you so much for being on the Cool Grandpa podcast. I do appreciate it. Thank you for having me. Wow, what a great conversation with Kerry. I really enjoyed getting to connect with her and get a mom's perspective about this role of being a grandparent with the grandkids, and especially from how we can make this role work and how we can build these bonds even though there is distance between us. I mean, we're lucky that we no longer have to live just on the occasional letter or postcard, but we've got all this digital technology that we can take advantage of. Plus, it's so easy, or easier now, to jump on an airplane, go see the grandkids, or have them come see you, or take a drive and go see them. But in those in-between times, we have to remember to be intentional about how to build those connections so that when we do get on site and we do see those kids, we're super excited to be with them, and that bond is just already there. We don't have to take some time and kind of reestablish those connections. One of the biggest takeaways that I had was that grand path
that Kerry was talking about. I absolutely loved it. And so we went through those 5 P's, right? It was plan, partner, prepare, play, and preserve. Now, look, this is going to be great. So I want you guys to be sure to go check out the Long Distance Grandparent. And if it's appropriate for you, join the Long Distance Grandparent Society. I know I've just signed up for it, and I'm excited to learn what Kerry can teach me about building that meaningful relationship with my grandchild. Until next time, remember to stay cool. Thank you for listening to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and share it with a friend. That's the best way you can help us to expand our community, as well as get the news out about how valuable grandpas are in the lives of those kids. If you'd like to leave me a comment or shoot me a potential topic for this podcast, please go to www.cool-grandpa.us. Look for the comments tab, fill it out, hit submit. It's as easy as that. Until next time, remember to stay cool.